Hey, I'm Ciara Pressler, and this is the interview where I interview my favorite creators, innovators, and game changers to help keep you motivated and inspired on your path to creating your own success. Today is my friend Aurin Squire. He is a New York playwright, reporter, and screenwriter, and currently he is the supervising producer on the TV dramas The Good Fight and Evil. He's also been a writer on This Is Us. I know just saying the word makes you want to start crying. And BrainDead. As a playwright, he's been a New Dramatist's resident playwright who has commissions at Miami New Drama and Lean Ensemble in South Carolina for new historical dramas. He's been awarded the Helen Merrill Prize for Emerging Writers, Seattle Public Theater's Emerald Prize, National Black Theater's I Am Soul Fellowship, and the Dramatists Guild of America Fellowship. Oh, and the Brooklyn Arts Exchange Artist in Residency and U.S. Playwright Residency at Royal Court Theatre in London. His plays have received world premieres in New York, London, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles. As an indie journalist, his articles have appeared in the New Republic, Talking Points Memo, ESPN, the Chicago Tribune, and the Miami Herald. He's a graduate of the Juilliard School and Northwestern University, lives in Brooklyn, but coming to us, I believe, from Miami. Please help me welcome Aurin Squire. All right, Aurin, where are you at right now?
I am in Miami Gardens in Florida with my parents. I was here for a musical that was premiering that I wrote that got postponed. I decided to stay down here rather than go back to New York. And then the writer's room for Evil second season started up 2 or 3 months early. So they just decided, since everyone's under quarantine, let's just start again. So I went from The Good Fight, was supposed to be like a 2 or 3 month break, but instead we just went right back into Evil. But now we're using Zoom, like half the world is, and just the different writers are in, California, San Francisco, Idlewild, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, New York, Brooklyn, scattered around, and we meet every day on Zoom and do our work there through the Google Whiteboard and then Miro, which is one of the new programs a lot of TV shows are using.
That's incredible. When I think of a TV writer's room, which I've never actually been in, I think of this big conference table and papers everywhere and whiteboards and chalkboards and just this beautiful creative process that's really kinetic happening. How does that translate online?
Well, you have less energy because you're staring at a screen. So there are certain things I think you have to monitor your pacing throughout the day, monitor looking at screens. So not to be disrespectful, but sometimes you just look down just so you can listen without having to constantly engage with looking at people. And generally it's been quicker to some extent because you're just working and thinking about what's immediately at hand, and there are less distractions right now. So the room isn't as long on Zoom, but we're getting just as much work done. So that's good. And now we've eliminated all of the paper because everything's all on the computer, and we can switch cards around. And writing cards used to be this intensive process, and now just typing it into the Miro, slide the card over, and so people can have thoughts and ideas. So it appears to be quicker. I don't know what's going to happen when this is over, if we're going to even go back to writers' rooms like that, or if they're going to seem so inefficient, like writing a script on a typewriter or a word processor. Have we passed that point, and has this current crisis actually kicked us off into a new age of office work when we realize 90% of white-collar workers don't need to show up at work?
It is a whole new world. I just got off the phone with negotiating with my landlord, and of course they want like a 3-year lease, a 6-year lease for our clubhouse space, and I'm like, I can't commit to anything right now. We can take this in a 3 or 6 month chunk, but after that we're gonna have to shop.
Yeah, so things are going to become more flexible, all online, less time, maybe more efficient, but also less personal and less intimate, and maybe some of that will be lost. It seems like not that big of a deal to jettison these elements of human interaction one-on-one. But it's surprising how much you miss something when it's gone. You don't realize it. I remember listening to stuff on the radio, listening stuff on tape decks, and then transitioning from tape decks to CDs, and then from CDs to now online. And then, you know, my dad would have some records when I was a child. He would play them on the record player. And at each step, you are able to store more information and you're able to have a tougher product, but the quality of sound declines. And it's very incremental, because obviously if it was a big drop, you wouldn't use that technology. But the richness of, I know this sounds like a cliche thing, but the richness of a record player, you do feel, if you've only listened to stuff online, you feel the richness of the needle going through these grooves of information and feeding out this well-rounded marbled sound, versus a tape, which has its own sound, and then CDs, which is a more compressed digital aspect of all that flavoring, and now online, which is even more compressed. And so in some elements, all of the sort of soul is missing, or not all of the soul, but a lot of soul is missing, and music all seems to be done by a computer algorithm these days, because we've lost that intimacy, and we've lost that while gaining technological expertise and being able to store all of our entire song collection on like a disc this big.
There's a trade-off. Yeah, I heard an interview about that, you know, the way that music can make us feel, especially, you know, when you're in a symphony hall, in a concert hall, those rhythms like move our bodies like a sound meditation, right?
Yeah.
And when the music's so compressed, we're missing part of that effect of like that real bass line that can actually move the energy in our bodies, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, they released a lot of songs of Michael Jackson posthumously in the last 7 or 8 years. And these are songs like the Beatles that were left behind that they didn't release. And usually there's a reason why they didn't release them. But they've gotten the best producers and they've remixed them. And one of the collaborators, Michael Jackson, said that most of these songs just lacked a certain it factor. They lacked they were cold. They were like an impersonation of the legend rather than the feel of it. And I remember growing up reading Isaac Asimov, who was one of my favorite sci-fi writers, and he wrote more books than any writer in the 20th century. But after he died, they continued one of his famous trilogies, the Foundation series. And like Star Wars, they wrote a prequel trilogy, and then they wrote post, and they wrote all these things. And these were ghostwriters using Isaac Asimov as an estate name. And you can tell, like, and I didn't realize that until later on. I thought like, oh, he just became a bad writer, or maybe he's getting old. And someone's like, no, that's a ghostwriter. You're like, oh, just like Tom Clancy novels, just like a lot of the things, they use his name, but it's just filling in an outline and hiring someone who can bang out something quickly. And the initial trilogy of the Foundation series is so detailed based upon the mind of Asimov and all these intricate, quixotic, weird facts that he brings in. And then after that, when you read the prequel, it is like the prequel to Star Wars. It's more elaborate in these explosions and car chase scenes and spaceship chases, but it's lost a certain humanity. But it's all under the same banner.
Couldn't you argue the same thing about television? You know, say somebody writes a pilot and they're the sole writer of a pilot of a TV series. And I think we're in the absolute top golden age of television because of streaming. You know, all these roles for women have gotten so much meatier, so much more multidimensional. It's very exciting what's getting produced for somebody who's just on the viewer side. I do miss the event of live television of, you know, I love getting on award shows still, or even live sports and like live tweeting with people, like we're all watching at the same time together. But, you know, one could argue that how does a writing team, you're talking about, it sounds like maybe a dozen people, try to keep the spirit of the pilot or the first season?
That depends upon the showrunner, and that depends upon how the room is structured. There's some rooms where you go off by yourself and each Writer has their episode, or their episodes they write based upon an outline that has been agreed upon in the room, and then they shepherd that episode all the way through. And it is very, each episode, and you sort of have to have a showrunner service quality control from the three different areas. A script and a story is made three different ways. It's made once when it's written, it's made again when it's shot, and most importantly, it's made a third time when it's edited. And so have a showrunner who has quality control in all three of those elements. Otherwise, that's why a lot of TV shows spin wildly out of control, because each one of those elements involves dozens, if not hundreds of people who are all inserting their own take. And you need to have everyone on the same page, clear about the vision and shepherding it through, because you can't really be a showrunner and run a show by yourself. And so you have stuff like Barry on HBO, or Girls, and according to IMDb and according to online, Lena Dunham wrote every episode of Girls. That's not true. Barry wrote, the two main people wrote every episode of Barry. That's simply not true. They put their name on everything, but they had a writer's room, and that writer's room was pumping out ideas, and then the showrunner narrowed down what they were interested in, and then people chipped in probably dialogue, anecdotes, and then the writer went away, wrote it out, and put their name on it. But it was a collaborative effort. And so, but they seemed like great auteurs who did it all by themselves, and they didn't at all. But that's a very popular trick on cable, is that you get more cachet if it looks like you're an auteur who did it by yourself, as opposed to the reality is that TV and film and even theater are collaborative sports. They require a lot of hands getting in there. And yes, you can put your name up top, but you don't lose anything from sharing credit. Like, no one doubts that it's a Martin Scorsese picture, even though he's never written a script. He hires writers. He could do a lot of directors do, which is they put their name on the script, just so they can have bases covered as the, cinema genius. They could write it and put their name on the script, put their name on directing, put their name on craft services, put their name on sound mixing, and just put their name like Trump does and just stamp his name in as many places as possible, take credit for as many different areas. You could do that, and it's very, I guess, a masculine capitalist energy to like control everything, and I'm all the means of production. But people behind the scenes like, no, that's not true. And in fact, like I said before, there is no shame. There's no doubt when you watch a Martin Scorsese picture that it is him, even though he gives credit to the writer, to the DP, to everyone involved. But Martin Scorsese has a comfortable enough ego that he can share without losing, his masculinity. I'm trying to be PG here, losing his sense of masculinity and having to collaborate and share with other people.
No need to be PG at pregame.
Lose his balls. He doesn't lose his balls by sharing.
Thank you. I love that you bring that up, because one of the principles that pregame is built on is that you can't have success without a team, and the team might be in the background, but there's such a myth, same myth that exists in entertainment and culture exists in entrepreneurship. And everyone glorifies like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk as though they built a Tesla or an iPhone bit by bit all by themselves, but really they have these entire teams, and it ripples out through many places, many years, because none of us could have accomplished anything that we do without all the people who came before us. So it's a very American narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone knows Steve Jobs. Maybe half as many people know Steve Wozniak, who actually designed the Apple. It actually was the person who made it. But Steve Jobs was the one who put his aura around it and was the face of it. And good for him. But like, you should give credit as much to Steve Wozniak and the actual designers of Apple who innovated it and carried it forward.
Could it be said, though, that that's something you earn as you gain success, though, is the right to have like this brand aura? I always use like fashion designers as an example. Like, we all know that if we walk into a outlet mall and there's a Calvin Klein pajama pants hanging there that Calvin Klein himself did not design that pair of pajama pants, but it's like one of the lines that's more accessible to everybody. But it was something that he was able to build through starting with that designer brand that walked the runway. And then now there's all these other tiers of his brand. Is that something that as a creative person, you maybe earn the ability to have brand extensions?
Absolutely. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You can put your name on everything. I mean, there's certain film, like literally, you're right. It's a free country. There's certain filmmakers, I'm not going to name them, but they literally put their name on everything. And that is fine. I'm just saying it's a very toxic sign of our society. We live in a society that truly, truly hates workers and worships management. So at every level, whether it's actors, the big deal for an actor is to become a producer. Producers are just managers. The big deal for a writer is to become a director. The big deal for anyone is to move up into a management position. It isn't to perfect their actual craft, which is like the work. It is, I want to be at a level where I can give other people orders. And it's weird because if you're a good actor, that has nothing to do with being a good producer. If you're a good teacher, that has nothing to do with being a great principal. But in our society, because we have such a disrespect for work and for unions and for collective action, we always are aspiring to become the boss in some way. We always are aspiring to put our name on everything and to shut other people down in some ways because we live in a toxic, capitalist, selfish, narcissistic culture that doesn't value unions, which is why the unions are degenerating, that doesn't value collective action, that doesn't value people who work at home and take care of kids, that doesn't value housewives and house dads and people who take care of their children. It values the masculine, ego-dominated managerial position. And that's one of the allures they use. If you have any success, one day you'll be Calvin Klein. Or if you're a writer, one day you'll be Steven Spielberg and you get to direct. If you know anything about directing, directing's dog work. Directing's awful. You're just sitting around and people are passing decisions for you, and then everyone actually does the work. It's just sitting around and pointing at stuff. But that's what you're aspiring to do, which if you truly love writing, that's actually probably something you would not love doing is directing. Because if you're an actor, odds are you probably wouldn't love producing outside of the ego factor. If you're purely an actor. Now, a lot of people I like to do multiple things, but if you are a pure one thing and you like to get your hands in the dirt and work and be the gardener and till and watch the plants grow, why would you want to be a CEO for big agri company? Like, those are not connected, but there's more prestige when you're at a cocktail party saying, I'm a CEO for a big agricultural company, as opposed to saying I'm a farmer or I get my hands dirty. And that's, I don't blame the artist. I'm saying that is our society as a whole. It's very tricky.
I think you're right. Yeah, in the startup world, you see that, and I like to differentiate between, if you really love the work that you do, and if you really want to stay in the space of creativity, you might consider getting a job doing what you do so that you don't have to worry about managing it. Some people really like the game of scaling and multiplying, and or they like to manage other people. That's fine, but it's always about being honest with yourself about why you're in the game.
Yeah, I mean, my mom worked for almost 40 years for Florida Power and Light, and several times they tried to promote her to middle manager, and she did not want that. She was a computer programmer. She was like, I don't want to do that. Lucky for her, because later on when the company consolidated and sort of, they cut all the middle managers. So all the computer programmers who had been aspiring and promoted to middle managers, all those people got wiped out. And that's why she lasted for 40 years, because she was like, I will manage projects. I have no desire to manage other people in that way and to like climb the corporate ladder. The downside is most of the time, those don't make for good biopics. Those don't make for hero journeys that you hear about. You don't hear about the hero's journey of the team that made the Apple computer.
Yeah.
You don't hear about the hero's journey of all those components. You just hear about the salesman of Apple. You don't hear about all the people who came to make the assembly line delivery of food that is McDonald's and the fast food industry and chain restaurants. You just know about the lead salesperson of it,
Yeah.
who sort of wrapped it all up. And there is a power in that. There is a power in being a producer and talking and being that voice and face of something. I don't want to dismiss it. I'm just saying, is that where your heart truly is? Or are you a teacher who feels guilty about only wanting to be a teacher and you push yourself to become a principal and then you're unhappy? Are you a writer who only wants to do writing, but you push yourself to become a producer or a director because that's what you're told you're supposed to do, and that takes you farther away from your passion?
I think what you're talking about is the difference between validating where you are in your career externally versus internally,
Yes.
and being conscious enough of what you want and what you actually need versus needing other people to approve of your career path.
Yes, I mean, theater it is a great thing to be in theater because you learn internal validation because it is a long delay. Theater is right next to maybe releasing books of poetry or being a novelist in delayed gratification.
Yes, I
Like
know
you
that.
have to wait, and if you cannot wait, theater will boot you out. You'll just get frustrated and you'll leave. And so it boots out a lot of very talented but impatient people who want external validation, because unless you are one in a million, one of those stars that manages to land just at the right place at the right time and your first place produce, which happens sometimes, those people usually don't succeed in theater. Or even if they do have that first hit project, the second project is a slog. And so you learn about, drive. There's this great book that I think we talked about by Robert Pink called Drive. And it's about the 3 drives that people have. And it talks about this in regards to how managers should work with their employees and work with other people. And they say the first drive that every human being has is the negative drive, which is, I don't want to be punished. You do this, if you don't do this, you get a beating. If you don't take out the garbage, you get slapped. If you don't get the good grade, you get punished. And so that's just like the thou shalt not commandments drive of like, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt be competent. And that usually is good enough to be like a C plus B minus student. Fear will motivate you to do the minimal work so that you won't get hit.
Ooh, yes.
Which in the system of the Amazon system of capitalism, which is based actually in the slavery system of capitalism, which is how our factories were designed off of the plantation method. That is why American workers, when they're under that, have very low productivity. Like blue collar workers have very low productivity, not because they're stupid, not because they don't work hard, but because they are driven by the fear, which is, I will do the absolute minimum not to be punished. And so they do it and they get by and no one comments. If they succeed too much, then other people drag them back down because they're messing up the averages. And they succeed too low, people harass them and beat them until they raise themselves up to the average level. The second that people have is the reward level. And that's what we spoke of, which is you do good and you get casual Fridays. You do good and you get cupcake Mondays. You get these parties you throw, you get like bonuses, and that's good. I mean, everyone wants to be rewarded for good work. Everyone wants their bonus during Christmas. Everyone wants a pizza party or a cupcake party or some sort of reward in the office. And that is generally good at getting people to like a B+ level of work, but it's external rewards. It's waiting for someone to say, here's a cupcake, or here's a bonus, or here's a raise. And yes, I want a raise, you want a raise, everyone wants a raise. But as far as making you an innovator, that only goes so far. And the studies by Robert Pink showed there's a certain point where you can't motivate someone with money. There's a certain point where money no longer motivates people. Like if they're rich enough and comfortable enough, you can offer them a bonus of $100,000 to work overtime, and people will be like, no. Or they'll do it and they'll do a crappy job because they don't need the $100,000, they're wealthy enough. Or they don't need the $5,000, they're comfortable enough. The third level of drive that most people don't tap into that he talked about was something that's internally motivated. And it's the drive of people who do the New York crossword puzzle. It's the drive of people who do Sudoku. Like, there's no reward in finishing a New York crossword puzzle. There's no reward in doing Sudoku. So why do people do it? It's the puzzle making nature inside the mind, and you get dopamines off of figuring out something. It's this thrill of like, I completed the crossword, or I did this, and no one's gonna hand you a plaque. No one's gonna give you a bonus. You're not gonna have an award ceremony where you're gonna stand up and speak about finishing this really tough crossword, the Sunday crossword, the toughest one. You just get this internal like boost. That validation, if you can inspire people with that third internal thing, the sky's the limit. There is no limit to how hard people will work based upon like, I'm going to do this because I'm figuring out a problem and this thrills me. The initial people who designed Apple in the garage, the initial people who made Microsoft with Bill Gates in a garage, those people were nerds who didn't have a lot of money and didn't aspire to be billionaires. They were thrilled by figuring out how they could get these boards to come together to make something called a computer, to make something called a desktop computer. And then other people said, well, you know, you could do this with it. You could play video games. And they were like, yeah. Well, I'm all in favor of that. But look what I figured out. If I connect this to this, this makes this other thing light up. And they're just completely enwrapped in the inventor passion of things. If you can spark that, and you don't have to be an inventor, you don't have to be a writer. In whatever you do, if you can spark that third drive, that internal motivation, that inventor, that puzzle solver passion, then you can get people to work however long you want. And then you yourself will work around the clock just to figure this out, because it'll kill you in the middle of the night. You'll wake up, you'll be thinking about it in bed. You'll be like, oh man, if only I blah, blah, blah. And you're trying to turn your mind off, and your mind won't turn off because it's like, I got to figure this out. Now, if you're working for external validation, your boss slaps you on the back, says, good job. You go home and have a good night's sleep. Now, you might know that the board isn't fixed. And you might know that your boss is so dumb that he doesn't know that the board isn't fixed, and you're a computer programmer, but you fall asleep. You go like, well, that's, I got validated, good night. And so once you get people who are motivated on that third level, that internal motivation, then people have fun. People, odds are, in the long term, are more rewarded financially. They're happier. And then you have the job as a manager and as a collaborator of slowing people down so they don't work too hard. Then you have to make sure that people do not burn themselves out, because they will, because that high is like little doses of cocaine. That puzzle thing is like, and so people will start chasing it, and you will see in the higher echelons of technology and in the entertainment industry, you will see a lot of workaholics who will be there like, no, I got this. And as a good collaborator and as a good manager, you have to close their computer. You have to grab their coat, pick them up, and tell them to go home to their wife and kids, or go home to their husband, or regenerate their mind. And yes, the problem will still be here on Monday or Saturday if you come in on the weekend, but you have to be sure that the racehorse doesn't run itself down. And if you are that type of person that is living your passion, you have to be your own manager and make sure you don't overwork yourself, because you will. And you'll think, because we live in a Puritan society, we're doing a good job. What's your biggest flaw in job interview? I work too hard. I'm a workaholic. I work too hard. I'm a workaholic. I like to work. And it's kind of a backhanded, well, not a backhanded, it's a compliment we're giving ourselves. But working too hard is actually not a good thing in the long run. If you really are working hard, it diminishes your capabilities in the long run. It makes you sicker. It makes you less innovative. And it will honestly run you down into the grave. And there are people who end up workaholics dead at 35 or 40. And they were like, I work too hard. And it's like, oh, they really did. Now they're dead. And now they're not solving any problems. They're not making any computers. Steve Jobs got pancreatic cancer. And instead of actually treating himself, he continued to work and not listen to doctors and think, well, I'll do this treatment, I'll do that treatment. And now he's dead. So this is considered the apex of Western capitalism, Steve Jobs. And you saw someone who worked himself to death, who was on a bed, not listening to doctors, coming up with his own therapy treatment, and still trying to run a multi-billion-dollar company. And now he's not running anything. And that's sad.
It is sad, and I identify with it a lot, though. You know, there's a quote by Andy Warhol that good business is the best art, and I definitely see my business as like an art project, and I will get burned out because I really get off on like solving this thing, and if we structure this and this and that and all the different pieces, and the discipline, it's for me, is not going to the desk every day. The discipline for me is shutting down, not necessarily the laptop, but my brain, from trying to continue to cycle through all of that. I'm glad you brought up this example of Drive. We'll have to get into that, but at Pregame we have a business book club, and this month we're instead of a book, we're doing a documentary, and we're doing American Factory. It's such a good example of that difference in the drive between that bare minimum, which is maybe the American Factory style, and that drive for excellence and being part of something greater, which seems to be the Chinese approach in this documentary. So we're going to be discussing that next week. But I want to know.
It's also shame. There's a strong sense of shame and shaming your name and your family in Chinese culture that also is a more sophisticated version of fear, in my opinion. But that's a whole other discussion.
Well, I'm not sure it is, because
we don't have that same thing in America, because we don't care about, like, all right, crap on my name, I don't care. Or my family lineage, like, I don't care about my grandfather.
Yeah, but I want to talk about that internalized part, though, because, you know, everyone who is creative, which I think is everyone who founds a business, so a lot of my clients, or artists, creative professionals, and then the Venn diagram of both. But, you know, we all have an inner critic. We all have some drives that control us that are not healthy. You know, what's your experience with that in your career? You're a prolific writer. You write for stage, you write for screen, big screen and small screen. How do you deal with those internal obstacles, or internalized obstacles in the case of capitalism?
My thing is always a question. So it motivates me when I'm writing a piece to have a dramatic question that I don't know the answer to. And then in answering that question, the conversation becomes the work. And it's really me arguing and debating a point among these different factions and different people. And so if I know the answer to the question, then it's not a piece I want to work on. But if it's truly provocative enough that it causes me to feel torn, then I can write something. And that's the easiest way. I've written other stuff that's just straight up one side, but that takes me a lot longer. But if I can create that argument, that puzzle, then my mind will work on it while I'm, you know, washing the dishes, while I'm driving around. Another argument, and then they're going to say this and so I work better when it's a more confrontational debate, because I grew up going, you know, and being in debate since middle school. So I was all about bringing something out in the open and debating it among people. And I think in America, there's some shame in arguing. There's some feeling like, we have to agree. We need to agree. We're all, and I grew up around, no, you argue, you debate this out. You know,
well, now you work on a series about attorneys now, so it's perfect.
Yeah. It's attorneys and people investigating stuff. I'm Buddhist in the Gelugpa tradition. They're major debaters. And so I grew up around people who have these confrontations. And it's not like, I think the fear is, I'm confronting you. I hate your personality. It's like, no. I'm confronting you because this makes us better, and I'm interested with this question. So there was someone who, we were doing the Martin Siegel Center, and we had this discussion with Melanie Joseph, who challenged me on stuff, and I responded. And I thought that made for a good session. And then afterwards, it was like, I just want to make sure you're okay. And I was like, I'm fine. We had a debate. I wasn't sitting there being like, I can't believe you're doubting my opinion. I was like, no, this is debate. And I'll tell you why I think this. And then you can push me further and you will force me to actually dig deeper into my own logic than I would have if everyone would have agreed with me. And I think as liberal-minded progressive people, we have a tendency to silo ourselves only with people who agree with me, only people who have my position in life, who vote this way, who think this way. And social media is great in booting people out of our algorithm who don't have that view. But I actually like having people who, without being rude, which is difficult, especially politically, without turning it into a personal hate fest, who say, I believe this, and then you could have an honest debate and be like, all right, using your logic, so this is the end of your logic being a libertarian, which is 2 million people die of the coronavirus in America because we don't have a right to, or whatever the debate is, and is that worth the freedom? And the other side could be like, well, yes, it is because of these reasons, and more people die from government regulations, or whatever the argument is. If you can present facts to me, it will make me think, and it will make me a better liberal. It'll make me a better progressive. You need to have conversations with your racist uncle during Thanksgiving. You need to have conversations with your conservative aunt. They only make you a better progressive. They will only make you a better artist and innovator and business person, so you know how to talk to them. And you know how to talk around and talk with them.
I wish, I'm very conflict avoidant, and one thing I struggle with in leadership is wanting to be liked over being effective, and it's just something I have to continually work on. But I also see it as very cultural, and even within the United States, East Coast versus West Coast, and you're somebody who splits your time between Miami, New York, LA, and I grew up on the West Coast, moved to New York for a very long time, learned how to communicate in a certain way, and then I moved to Portland, Oregon, where the communication is much softer, and I still have a hard time adjusting to it. But do you see those cultural differences yourself with the different writers you work with around the country?
Yeah, I was told that the first room I was in New York City, and that it was probably be a rare situation. It was mostly playwrights. We would talk about, opera during lunch, or talk about theater pieces, literature, novels we were reading, and the conversation of philosophies, and the conversation just flowed like that. And I was told this was a very unusual situation. These were very much third drive people. These were people who were internally motivated. They read the philosophy books not to complete a coursework. They read them because they actually are curious about the nature of man outside of, fucking and fighting. They're actually curious about the nuances and human behaviors. And so when I went out to LA, I found that, debate was a little bit more scandalous. Like disagreeing was more like, because everyone wants to be liked more on the West Coast, which in some ways makes people phonier. It makes people a little bit more superficial on the surface when anytime you dig an inch down, people get scared and back off, then the roots never really develop. They never really settle in when it's never challenged, and you're overwatering the plant. If I'm mixing metaphors, if you're overwatering the plant and not burying it deep, you end up just with rotten roots and a plant that blows over when the first strong wind hits it. And so a real plant, real roots, you starve it a little bit, you water it a little bit, you debate it, you let the roots settle deep into the ground, you give it tension, you give it something to weigh against, and then when that wind comes, that tree stands strong. And I feel like in West Coast, it wasn't a lack of intelligence, because it was the same level of intelligence. It was the lack of rigorous debate and analysis, so that a win would just blow people over of a controversy or any sort of debate. They would be flattened. And then because everyone else is in the same boat, the problem isn't that they have no roots. The problem is the wind never should have come anyway. So we need to build a barrier so the winds of change and the winds of debate don't come in here. And it's like, maybe you should get deeper roots. Maybe it's not that you should build barricade after barricade to prevent the outside elements from touching you. or only the softest sunlight through a filter touching you, only the right amount of water through a hydroponic system, and eliminating the, maybe the best system is to be exposed to the elements of human behavior and conversation and rigorous debate. And then you come up with the best art. You come up with the most creative solutions, and some egos get bruised along the way, but then you have to bring people back to, it's about the work we're creating. It's not about being liked. If you work well, you will be liked as a side effect. You will be liked as an afterthought. It's like certain things in Buddhism that you practice, or that we practice, talk about the success is a side effect. Like that'll happen anyway. But in our society, we're ass backwards. We're obsessed about the money number first, when in fact, that's an after effect of being passionate. We're obsessed about being liked, where being liked is an after effect of being amongst a group of people who are like-minded and who are focused on something. And then you find, hey, I think, Karen said this last week when we were solving a problem. That was funny. And you smile and you're fond of Karen. And that carries forward next week in work, rather than someone trying to please you by presenting you with presents or please you with compliments. The liking isn't the end goal, it's in the journey. And I think, and a lot of times we mix it up. We think money's the end goal. We think being liked is the end goal. That happens along the journey on the project you're passionate about. And if someone doesn't get that, then they're not a part of your team. And you need to find other teammates who understand that this is the goal. They say there are two things you need to know in life. And I don't know who said this. I heard this years ago in a room. It's where you're going, and two, who's going with you. And it has to be in that order. If it's reversed, everything in life will go wrong. And most people reverse it. They think, who do I like around me? Who's likable? And then they go, okay, what's my journey? And guess what? A lot of likable people aren't on your journey. They aren't on your level. They're not on a lower level or high. They're just not on your level. They're not on your wavelength, whatever terminology you want to use. You just found them likable, and they said a cute joke at a party. And now 5 years later, you're in this dysfunctional relationship because you're not heading in the same direction. This person wants to go over here and you want to go over there. This isn't a relationship that's going to last. But if you decide what your goal is first, and then who's going with you, then you will tend to attract people who are on that same path. But if you switch it, you will, odds are, run into a lot of dead ends and obstacles, because you'll run into a lot of nice, likable people who you sort of keep around like houseplants. And then at a certain point, you're like, why is that thing there? That doesn't do anything for me. Oh, I kind of like them, but now they're sort of annoying. They're annoying because they're an anchor, they're a weight. And you're annoying them because you're a weight against their path. And so a lot of friendships and allyships that people have, it's this sort of frenemy status where you sort of like them, but they're sort of weighing you down. And it's sort of like driving with the brake slightly on, and you're grinding the gear and you can't figure out, why am I going so slow? You're going slow because you built your life around being liked first, and then your goal second. And that's why you're driving with the brake on.
Yes. So you might not be able to tell from Aurin's passion that he is actually quite the meditator. And so I want to talk about your inner work. And I mean, you are one of the foremost examples to me of somebody who puts community first, generosity first. When I first met you in 2012, you were already convening groups of creators and helping them find opportunities. You just exemplify giving before thinking about getting. Can you talk a little bit about where that philosophy comes from and how it's informed your path?
Well, yeah, in 2005, I graduated from New School, and I was a hustling New Yorker, and I wanted to be a playwright. So I, got an agent at Gersh. I got some fellowships and prizes, and I was doing my thing and hustling, but it was like I was driving with the brake on. I felt it. I felt like worn down. And it felt like it was me against the world, and everything was this barrier. Then I overcome that barrier. There's another barrier. And I could feel the weariness, but I just thought that was the way things are supposed to be. I met someone who recommended a book that was my intro into Buddhism, but it was a book about business. And it used the principles of Buddha's Diamond Cutter Sutra into this book about applying this sutra into business. So the book's called The Diamond Cutter by Geshe Michael Roach. I read that book, and it's one of the few times reading something I thought, oh, this is going to change my life. And there are a handful of books that I can say that about. Drive is probably one of them. And I could tell you how that came to me. That was also someone recommending it. But like, I read the book again, and it said, these problems in business are symptoms of something a lot deeper. It isn't necessarily about your success. And here's why. Like I said, it's the 1 versus 2. Going 1 first actually makes things harder. And it talked about mental seeds that make up our world, and the mental seeds I plant through what I say, through what I do, and through what I think. And every day I'm planting mental seeds, and I'm just scattering them everywhere. And usually they're by default. I'm not conscious of them. I'm just doing it. You say something, you're planting mental seeds. Every time you think something, mental seeds, every time you do something. And so it's to focus your mental seeds in the smallest way possible. You will get the largest bounty, the largest harvest. And it talked about these techniques that are based in wisdom and based in some things that have been tried and true. And it said, when you're working with yourself, you're planting a mental seed. That's a weak seed because it's only a reflection of one person. But when you're working with someone else, that's 2 people involved. It's you and that other person. When you work with 3 people, that's 3 people involved. And so on and so forth, these seeds multiply exponentially, not like normal arithmetic, but exponentially. So 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8 as far as the echo effect. And it sort of has this curve, this very steep upward curve. So it said the problem that I was doing is that I was working just with myself, which I was planting these seeds just about me, for me, you know, in this very small, narrow way to achieve my goals. They said, if you operate with wisdom, you work with other people, and those seeds multiply because you're planting them. Your mind's making a note. You're working with someone else, and so that doubles the seed amount. Whatever the amount of people, it doubles and it doubles it. So I started practicing this, and it worked. It just worked. It's hard to, I'm not gonna go in there because that would be like a 2-hour, 5-hour conversation, but there are many, many examples I had in my life where an obstacle would happen. I would take responsibility for the obstacle. I would figure out what the cause was based upon something in the past that I said, something that I thought, or something that I did. And then I would do an antidote. And there are antidotes in the book based upon a lot of scripture written thousands of years ago by very wise people who went through and actually searched out, like, these are the causes for these specific conditions human beings have. And here's the antidote to that cause that eliminates it. And so I did that, and I got the results, and I realized that if I was going to continue to do this, I had to change my focus. And so it talked about keeping a vow book so that I'm mindful of the things I do every day, keeping a vow book 6 times a day upon 10 basic principles of protecting life, protecting other people's property, because I'm very good about protecting my own, protecting other people's property, sexual purity, which isn't what you think, about respecting other people's relationships, speaking truth, speaking to unify, speaking gently, speaking meaningfully, having good thoughts when someone gets something they want, feeling bad when someone doesn't get what they want, and finally, worldview. So if you'll notice, out of the 10, 4 of them are about speech, speaking truth, unifying, speaking gently, speaking meaningfully, not gossiping. And the flip side is I can go through my life each day, write a positive for one of those points, write a negative, and then write a to-do, which is the antidote to that negative. And so if I'm going with protecting life, these are small things. It's not like you rescue a cat from a tree every day or a child from a burning building. These are small, picking up a piece of paper that someone might slip on type of scenarios, and honoring and recognizing that. And then a negative, well, I bumped someone in the subway. And then a to-do, which is I will give my seat on the subway for the next 10 rides or for the next day. And so I started doing this, and I started cultivating that garden of seeds and pruning away the weeds, because I'm doing the antidote. I'm not waiting, I'm doing it that day. And so it cuts it out quicker, cuts it out from the root, and then grows the good crops we want faster. And so I would keep this book, and then they said, okay, we'll start meditating, because if you have greater focus, you can plant seeds with greater emphasis. So then I started meditating, and that had its own benefit. I had headaches all the time. I used to pop aspirin all the time. I don't have headaches anymore. I carry aspirin for other people. I have a headache once every like 2 or 3 years. I used to walk around with just this tension in my head all the time. That's not there. And so I felt better, which makes you want to practice it more, which makes you want to dive in even more into meditation and do week-long meditation, month-long silent meditation retreats, study more Dharma, because it's not only beneficial on a level that feels good to me, but it spiritually feels good to me. And then as a side effect, there is a material gain. As a side effect, more jobs would come, more money would come, more opportunities would come. But then the goal switched. It wasn't about, oh yeah, I want to be a go-getter New Yorker. It's like, no, I'm going to do this, and I'll get that anyway. I'll just get that as the residual, as the extra left over. Because in most spiritualities, material things mean nothing. That's just like, oh yeah, you're rich, who cares? But like on a quantum physics level of your soul, or your mind stream of Buddhism, because I don't believe in a soul, or your soul in Christianity, materialism is nothing. But you can experience it as a residual of living a rich inner life. You can experience it, the richness externally. And so if you flip the goals, that happens. And so I took vows, I keep a book, I meditate every day. I try to go on meditation retreats when I can. And then I help out other people, because at a certain point at the end of the diamond cutter, it says, okay, you're having success. And if you've had any success, you're going to start to get bored. Because if you're succeeding and no one else is, that's a pretty shitty life. If you're living in a mansion and everyone's living in a shack, like what kind of richness is that? What kind of wealth is that if your career is going great and all your friends are breaking their back and crying and quitting their job and miserable? So the richness extends out from inside into the external world with gifts and prizes and jobs. And then like a ripple, like a wave rippling it out, it extends to your friends, it extends to your family, it extends to your colleague, and it keeps extending out. And instead of living in a world that is in a downward spiral where everyone is obsessed and everyone's thinking about themselves and that's its own ripple, you can reverse it, and then you find you're attracting more people who are like-minded, you're attracting more people, and the ripple grows and the wave grows out past you, and it affects people in ways that you will never know about. The things you are doing on a deep level, Ciara, and the people in this room, if you are doing anything with passion and love, it will affect people that you will never meet. This conversation will affect people you will never meet. And so that is powerful, that someone will stumble upon this or pregame or something that you've done years from now, and it will save their life, or it will get them a job, or will help them, and they won't ever thank you. The best thing they could do is they could pass it on to someone else. And so you have to teach it pure. You have to teach it as pure as possible so that it doesn't get diluted in the lineage as it gets passed on. You have to speak the truth, because most of the time, the facts and the truth are so diluted that, like a game of telephone, by the time it hits the second or third person, it's diluted to nothing. It means nothing anymore.
Yeah, I love that reversal, because a lot of time we're doing these practices in order to be more successful, in order to get more stuff, instead of for the sake of being
I spit it cold like lyrically I'm a problem, that's when the show starts. I get it livid, I did it, so who the illest spitter? You just a quitter, and I add you like Twitter, nigga. This is the new
VH1 behind the music, or any biopic, we know what happens when all you do is get material gains and you succeed. People are miserable. It isn't because they're bad guys or they're evil, because that's actually not what human beings desire on a deeper level. They've subjugated what they really desire and then projected it out onto a material gain of a Ferrari or a mansion or a hot girl or a hot boy or whatever the thing is. But okay, you get that. You got a mansion. How happy are you? How long are you happy with the mansion? A few days, a month, a week, whatever. Okay, you need a car. All right, you have the Ferrari. How long are you going to be happy now? Okay, and you keep running to different things, because after a week, I'm like, oh, this is no longer happy anymore. That's actually not the happiness.
We have a question. I'm going to unmute Cass. Go ahead.
Thank you. I love this. You kind of started answering it at the very end, but I'm curious. I was just yesterday talking with somebody about this kind of garden idea of kind of what you water grows, being intentional about your thoughts and words. And then the notebook idea, I love it. It feels super disciplined, self-disciplined, but I'm interested in bringing it back to the beginning about kind of toxic culture, capitalist, patriarchal culture, whatever you want to call it, and fighting. And you said speak your truth at the end too. So can you give some like pro tips on like me, my own little internal self, keeping my nice notebook, cataloging these like kind of experiences in a day versus channeling that and grounding it for like really productive confrontation of toxic systems or behaviors or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes, I will say, at least according to my vows, if I'm going to challenge someone, I have to make really, really strongly sure that I am not doing it in some subtle way in my own life. And so that's why the book is helpful. But like I have to check in my actions, in my words, and my thoughts, like a fine-tooth comb, and comb over them and see and try to suss out what subtle seeds I've planted in that, and then uproot those. And then when I go out in the world and I see something, it has to be, how to put this gently, it has to be, I'm seeing this wrong because it's coming from a very subtle seed in me. So I will now correct it for the sake of other people. So it isn't based upon my ego. It isn't like, I'm gonna tell you what you have done wrong and you need to listen to me because Mr. or like ma'am, like challenging the person. That's me living in my ego. That's me like I'm gonna tell you why you're wrong, why I'm right, and why you should apologize to me. But if I recognize that whatever I'm seeing is a mirror of something I've done, I it internally with myself, and then I go out like a warrior into the world to correct a wrong that I have participated in, and I have to treat the other person like they're my mother. So if I'm talking to my mother, would I be like, let me tell you, like if you see your mother doing something wrong, you're gonna try to correct them, but it's a different way. I would have more gentleness and clarity in trying to correct them. If they say in Buddhism, your mother has temporarily gone crazy and she has picked up a sword and she is going to stab you, Buddhists say, just don't sit there and get stabbed. Of course, stop your mother from stabbing you, but you're not gonna haul off and smack her in the face and the uppercut. Like, you're gonna handle it in a different way. You're gonna handle it like, okay, I love you, you've gone crazy, I'm going to try to disarm you. It's the same thing with my bosses. I had a situation where it was a job that had someone who just didn't like me. And everyone has that, where first day, no, you haven't done anything, you haven't instigated. There are a certain amount of people who just automatically like you. There's a certain amount of people that are neutral. They don't care whether you live or die, you're just there. And then there's a certain amount of people who just take a dislike. And it's based upon very deep, subtle seeds that have been planted in the past. And if you believe in past lives, you could argue you had some beef in a past life. And so this person just did not like me. It was palpable. I feel it. I had never met her before. I didn't do anything. I was just doing my job. And so I said, this is great. I'm going to practice these principles. I'm not going to confront her at all. I'm going to change this seed. And they say in Buddhism, you change a seed with someone, 3 things must happen. They change, they move away, or they die. Those are the 3, those are the only 3 things that can happen with enemies when you confront them. And so dying, it does happen sometimes. Not even gonna get into that. And so I was like, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna look at the office and the attitude of this office, and I'm gonna contribute to it. So there was a fruit stand around the corner from the office that sold very cheap fruit. So every day I brought in a bag of fruit. I set it up as a bag, people ate it, and then I started like presenting it in a bowl and adding little things. And this took like weeks, and adding to it and adding these displays, and people were like, oh my God. And people would come into the office looking forward. They'd be like, oh my God, thank you so much. And I shifted without having to confront her, without having to be like, I don't know, you're treating me, blah, blah. I was like, I'm going to shift this person. And this person doesn't know. This person will never know that I was doing that with that focus in mind. And so weeks passed, and then she started stopping by and having fruit. And then she started stopping by at lunch. And then we started talking, and then, you know, the ice melted between us that had been there. And then we were joking and laughing at a party. And then her husband got a job in another city and she moved. So 1 and 2 happened. She changed and she literally moved to another city, and there was no anger, animosity. And people like that are amazing. And in a true deep practice, I need people like that who do not like me, because then it forces me to be like, okay, what's wrong with this environment that I have to fix? And I'm not going to even tell them. Now, if you're in an abusive relationship, yes, that's different. But if it's subtle wrongs, it's like, I'm not even going to tell them. I'm going to change this world beginning here. And I'm going to do it like a ninja. I'm going to do this thing, and they're not even going to know about it. I'm going to hypnotize them. And the office changed. Not only did she change, that office changed. They loved me by the end. And I only left because I got another job. And they look forward to the fruit, but then so much more than that. But I found a small gesture that I could commit to on a consistent basis, and I did it without announcing it. I just started doing it. And I let people figure it out. They're like, did you bring this fruit? I'm like, yes, I did. But I didn't say like, I have brought fruit for everyone. I just set it out like a trap, like a mouse trap, and you just let it go. And you see people like, what's that? People can smell kindness like a mouse smells food. They can smell it. They don't even know what it is, but they can smell like something's happening over here. And they start gravitating towards that area. And then pretty soon everyone's there, and kindness is flowing because giving is there, and the whole office has shifted. There was another job I had where we worked a lot of hours, like 90 hours a week, 7 days a week. And so people were getting sick and people were miserable. So I started bringing in medicine. I kept aspirin, I kept cold flu, I kept lozenges, I kept an array, an assortment of things around me because it wasn't about me not getting sick. I was preventing other people from getting sick. And as a side effect, I never got sick. As a side effect, I worked 90 hours a week and I never got sick or a cold, because the second a sniffle was in my environment, I'd be like, you want something? Here, take some, like an array of things. And people are like, oh, thank you. I'm like, yeah, don't get sick around me. Here, take your stuff, here. And then people had more energy, they wouldn't feel miserable, and there was less sickness. But I went around and I observed what was missing from the office, or what were the problems people were having. And then I focused on it. In that case, I couldn't leave out a basket of medicine. So I had to be more focused, because that's against the rules. So I had to be like, I have this here. But if you can just leave it out there like a trap, people will smell it, stumble upon it, and it will start to change them.
Thank you so much. I love that specific example. I'm gonna have to try that. So we're about out of time. I can't believe it. I'm sad, and you've answered our usual last question about how you define success. So if you have more to say on that, that's great. But we also just want to know, what's next in your project portfolio. What are we gonna see from you in the next year or so?
Well, we are working on the second season of Evil on CBS. And then hopefully, if things get back up to speed at the end of the summer, that will start, and then we'll start working on The Good Fight. I have a musical about Louis Armstrong's life, A Wonderful World, that will hopefully start up again at the beginning of fall or end of summer. I have a historical drama with Lean Ensemble about the first town of Black freedmen in America during the Civil War, called Mitchellville. It was in South Carolina, and they were freed, and then they made their own town while the war was still going on.
Wow.
And so I wrote that as a historical drama that has Gullah Geechee music in it, but it isn't a musical. It's a drama with music and these breaks of like ring shouts and these different traditional folkloric dances and rituals. And then if I have some free time, I do want to do another month-long meditation retreat, because I was supposed to do that now, but because of the pandemic, I am here. And work started 2 months early. So as a lesson, I'm using like, okay, there's a reason why I couldn't do that. So I have to be out here in the world, because I'd much rather be in silent, isolated meditation retreat for a month or two, and then, wake up 2 months later, walk outside and be like the good Buddhists who got to chill out and, offer these cool bits of wisdom while other people were suffering. But the world was like, no, you don't get to do that. Like, you're going to have to be here with everyone else and watch this unfold and find a way to practice in the middle of a pandemic, to find a way to hold space and peace in the middle of chaos, in the middle of incalculable loss and suffering. To find some sort of practice here is in some way meditation. So that's what I'm working on. For the rest of this year, and it looks like until we have a vaccine, so through 2021 or 2020 until 2021, unfortunately, or fortunately, that's what I'm working on.
All right. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. That will be a ripple effect that we can't even measure. This has been Aurin Squire here telling us all about, oh, he's got another one.
And check out Limitless Health Institute.
Oh, yes, please.
Inner essentials for meditations that people can use in their day-to-day life if you're not a big-time meditator. To listen to these meditations and go through them will give you that space. And they're on Limitless Health Institute's website under Inner Essentials, and I think Pregame may have a link to some of the meditations.
Yes, I can send a link out to that. Thank you for sharing that. And thanks again, Aurin. I'm Ciara Pressler. This is Pregame, the interview, and please join us next time, Fridays, for this live stream. Game on.
Game on. Thank you.
I spit it cold like lyrically I'm a problem, that's when the show starts. I get it livid, I did it, so who the illest spitter? You just a quitter, son of